To begin.
Live in the city of Cudahy since '98, and by this point I sound like a broken record for my listeners. But it's been a very important space to grow up in, because I think, like most places, it kind of molds us into the people we are. And I think through me living there over the last, at this point, 20 years or something, it's kind of allowed me to take a look into myself and see how I can be more of value to my community, rather than just kind of taking from it. And I think that doesn't really happen to most people unless you kind of start going through your hardships or you start reflecting on what is affecting you in your community. And I think a lot of the times it starts from a frustration. And as we know, if we don't tend to that frustration, to those emotions, they can turn against us. And a lot of the people that I'm aware of in my circles, they have strong opinions about what things could be in the city, what things could be in their community, but nobody knows how to put that into action. So I want to learn from you and what your experiences have been and how that led you to your position now in the city of Cudahy.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, you mentioned it, right? Frustration. That's sort of how I fell into this work. I was not wanting to run for office. I had never considered it. Growing up in Cudahy, I was actually really shy. I got all 4s in all my grades except for speaking in class. And so everything else was great. But I think, like you said, out of frustration is where I came to this point. And I think the short story is, like, I went off to college, recognized, like, even though I had been a great student, I was involved in student body government, I was in volleyball and academic decathlon, I was in everything. But even though all that, I had gone off to college and recognized that, like, I did not know how to operate in the college system. How do I talk to my professor? What is normal? What is it? How do I write a paper for real? Right? And so all these different things. And I went to Facebook. I'm a millennial, so went to Facebook to vent that out. And some of my friends were like, I feel the same way. I'm in the dorms, but I do not know how to, like, operate in this very different culture. We're coming from Cudahy, where 96% of us are Latino. We basically all speak Spanish.
Yeah.
You go off to college, that's not the reality. And I was going to Cal State Long Beach, but my friends at, like, UCLA, USC, they were experiencing even, like, harder hardships. And so we started putting together workshops to put forward for our students at ELC.
Damn, that's awesome.
That was way back in the day. I was 19 at that point. And we started putting together those workshops of, like, alumni of Elizabeth Learning Center to students at ELC. And because of LUSD bureaucracy, you know how it exists, we weren't able to do it in the school. And so we were like, well, City Hall has space, but also it costs a lot of money. So how do we do this? So started going to City Hall, city council meetings. Actually, it was right after the scandal. So it was like the scandal was happening in Cudahy. The scandal had happened in Bell the previous year. And then now I was literally showing up because we wanted free space for youth. And I stuck around. And so I was there for 5 years going to council meetings. I joined the planning commission because I learned about it, because I started going to council meetings. But it was also the compound stress and frustration of, like, growing up in Cudahy. I'm a renter. Vast majority of us are renters. And as the first gen daughter of, like, immigrant parents, it was my job to translate those rent increase notices. Yeah. Recognizing that, like, oh shoot, this $150 increase is completely legal. But I'm Googling and I'm finding out that in LA City it's not legal. Why is that? And so as a kid growing up and learning about that, seeing my parents struggle, seeing my neighbors' struggles, I think really created that frustration where I ended up running for office. I was 25 at the time and very glad that I did it, because I feel like if I had waited, I wouldn't have. Yeah. But yeah, here we are. Yeah,
and from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, the youngest mayor in the city of Cudahy, right?
I think the youngest woman mayor. But I think there was a 22-year-old, like, way back in the day. Wow. We're talking like 80s, 70s. That was a mayor.
Really? 20? Damn, okay.
Yeah, he was really young.
Hey, I mean, you got to give it to the youth. You know, a lot of people like to kind of dismiss it just because you're young and, you know, like, you haven't seen that much. You're just angry, right? You're coming out of that phase, right? But in reality, like, no, like, sometimes your values are a little more reinforced in what you believe in, truly believe in, rather than waiting until things get knocked out of you as you get older.
100%. I remember when I was campaigning, there was, like, I thank him so much because it gave me a lot of strength, but he was hardcore bullying me. He was an older gentleman, standing taller over me, and he was like, what do you know? You're 25 years old, you don't have a mortgage, you don't have kids, you're not putting your kids through college. You don't know anything about my experience. Why should I elect you to Cudahy City Council? And I let him go, and I wanted to cry because I'm a chillona. But I was like, no, like, I understand. But the reality is that everyone you just mentioned that I am not has been at City Hall for years, and you're not happy. I am more representative of this community than all those people before me. I'm young. I'm not a homeowner. I'm a renter. But 85% of Cudahy folks are renters. Yeah. I didn't put my kids to school, but I work 2-3 jobs every single day of my life to make sure that I can put myself through school and support my parents. And so, yes, I don't have the same struggles you do, but I have very similar struggles, and we're all in this work together, and I'm here to support the struggles of our Cudahy community. And I think I ended up earning his support, but, you know, it was a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is sometimes you kind of, you have to stand your ground, allow people to vent, and you listen, you know, and that kind of breaks those boundaries, those barriers that a lot of the time it's, you know, it's just screaming, you know, like I went to one city council meeting once. I never went back again. I feel bad because for a long time, I was very dismissive about just the power that local politics has, right? And again, I think that came from my misunderstanding, me being naive, and just my thoughts being reinforced by just what I visually see happening in the city. And the thing is, the process behind this, it takes time, right? Like, it takes time, it takes effort, which is why people sometimes run for specific terms, because they want to make sure that they fulfill what they started, right? And although it seems slow sometimes and like the progress is just barely moving, when you take a look at the bigger things in the city, right? Like myself now, I'm seeing improvements. Like, I feel safer being in my city. Like I'm repping it now like crazy, because I know what it took to get here and everything that we have to go through. So it's cool that the youth around us have taken it upon us to make this change, right? This movement.
Oh, 100%. And I think politics are especially personal in a community like Cudahy, where, you know, over the past couple of years, we've been able to talk about rent stabilization, for example. That is so deeply emotional and personal. We had tenants that were coming in support of rent stabilization. They were coming to give public comment and support. And then their landlord spoke right after them, right? And saying, like, this person paid rent this many times, like, right, publicly calling this other tenant out. And she's like, mija, I lost my job. We've been trying to work as many jobs as possible to pay him back. But the reality is that we're still behind. Politics are so personal, and I think a lot of the times people forget that, because it's really easy to yell at politicians. Trust me, been there. But also I think it's difficult to recognize that when we elect people that actually care about the community, that are from the community, then we don't necessarily have to yell. We may still have to do it. Not saying you shouldn't yell at me. But we are constantly working towards something that supports our community. And I think that, especially in Cudahy, we've had such a huge turnover of who represents us. Now we have, for the first time ever, we're going to have 4 Latinas representing us on the city level, 4 progressive Latinas. We have never seen that before in our city. I don't think ever in Southeast Los Angeles. And in the past year or two, we've been able to do good work, I think, to really expand on, like, what people want in our city. And it's because regular people reached out, right? Like, Councilmember Lomelí, I recruited her because she reached out during 2020 and was like, hey, how much of our budget is coming to the police? And how much is going to, like, student programming and youth programming? And I was like, well, you must be a little bit interested then. Let me see if I can recruit you. And Cynthia Gonzalez has been interested in, like, policy and politics. And then Amanda Gomez, she's 23. And she just won her election in Cudahy. And she had reached out to me about street vending issues. She's like, how do we support street vendors? I'm interested in X, Y, and Z. And so I was like, well, you must be a little bit interested. Let's get you in, you know? And so things like that. And there's other young people that are also reaching out. And they're like, how can I want to talk about environmental justice. Like, great. Then we have an Environmental Justice and Green Space Commission that you should apply for, right? But those are hard to do because a lot of people don't know how to reach out to us. And that's what I feel like I'm pretty accessible. But folks don't know how to reach out. Folks feel shy, folks are scared. I think there's a lot of reasons for people not to reach out, unfortunately. That creates those barriers to them even knowing that there is work or progress or anything.
And how do you close that gap between, I'm sure a lot of people sometimes, if they don't want to do it face-to-face, like is there specific channels that they can use to like learn from afar in terms of what's happening in their city?
Yeah. I mean, if they don't want to do it face-to-face on their social media, of course, I try to share as much as possible, especially through the rent stabilization fight. It was a 6 months long process. First, a rent freeze, fighting for that, having folks come out and speak in public for it, but also sending in emails. Folks that didn't feel comfortable coming out or had to work or whatever it may have been. And then throughout that process, just like mapping it out and making images, making graphics that show people like, this is where we are. This is where we need to be. And even explaining like, there's a first reading to the ordinance and a second reading and then a 30-day implementation. Those are processes that people are not familiar with, that I think as an elected official, our job is to break down and to explain those sometimes several times and having to walk folks through it. Yeah,
no, that's definitely one of those things because, I've been a victim to that where I've, like, for example, the most recent example for me was the election day. You know, I was there voting and stuff, and then there was some of the local measures that I was, honestly, it was completely uninformed in. And until I was there and I was like, wait, what? Like, did I not get my stuff in the mail to, like, know what's going on? That I had to kind of do it there while I was on the phone in the booth. I did my choices on whatever I thought was best in my perspective, right? And then when I got outside, there was a señora that she asked me to push her, like, la viejita. She was like, oh, do me a favor, empújame a la calle. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll push you. And while I was talking to her, she was just kind of giving me a breakdown of why she voted the way she did, what she thought about, so-and-so in the city. And I was just, I have no into any part of the city. So I was just listening to this person, right, to this other human. And I'm thinking like, wow, like she has a lot of concerns that I wouldn't expected somebody in her age range to have concerns about it. And, it was just talking about like the vendors and like, I think parking and I was like, okay, I'm just listening. But I'm thinking like, I wonder how many people else like are in this area feel the same way where they feel like there's a little disconnection between what's going on. And my thing has always been trying to figure out how do we narrow that? How do we close that? How do we inform people while at the same time keeping true to the way that they get their information?
Yeah, and there's been a lot of ways that we've tried exploring it in Cudahy. Obviously on the social media side, right? That's, I think, a given. Or you should definitely do that. And we have that method. But even, for example, we have our monthly food distribution where every single month we give folks like foods, meats, beans, rice, everything, the essentials, even milk sometimes and eggs, for them to take home and then make their meals. And in those bags, we now include like city information, because we have little like community trips to the beach, for example, or Knott's Berry Farm, or even like Laker games, LAFC games, etc. And so even those little fun things, which I think are so important to like just building community. Yeah, of course. You don't always have to like be doing work to build community. You can also go to the Laker game and have fun, and or Clippers if you're a Clippers fan. Whatever it may be. Just throwing a little out there for both sides. But just like including that in the bag, or even for example, I was hearing a lot of feedback when we were implementing rent stabilization that the tenants knew like the maximum is 3%. But I tell my landlord and they're saying that's not true. And so they came back to me and they're like, what do I do, Liz? Like, I don't know how to explain this to them. And so then I had our staff draft a 1-page letter from the tenant to the landlord, giving them like, this is the city ordinance number. This is how you can look it up. Yeah. And here's a 1-page fact sheet as well. English and Spanish for folks to understand it, not only themselves as a tenant, but as a landlord. And that was so helpful because now people didn't have to like feel like they had to do their own research, read an ordinance that's several pages long, and like dissect what they needed. They could just have a 1-pager, pass it over to the tenant. And that, including that in our food distribution, was so important. Sending it out to neighbors. Folks will reach out to me via social media like, hey, Liz, I need one of those sheets. And I'll show up in person, I'll drop it off, and one for each of their neighbors as well. And even that builds community too, and just kind of engages like, oh, why is she here? I've seen her now twice. She's knocking on doors. Yeah, what is she doing? Which happens all the time, because I'm like trying to get into an apartment building and just like begging, I guess, outside of the door that's locked. And so people do ask, and they're like, oh, what are you doing here? I'm like, oh, well, I'm the vice mayor. I'm here to inform people. And I purposely do it. Like, I'm here to inform one of your neighbors about our rent stabilization, because did you know there's a limit of 3% every year? Like, oh no, well, here's a flyer, and taking those opportunities, I think, to like small organizing wins, I think.
No, that's a great way. I've been learning the last year that it starts with your neighbors, like having the conversations in general, because you don't have to go and tell somebody, like, hey, come to the council meeting with me. It's just a matter of like, hey, look, this is happening here. Like, and that opens conversation, and then hopefully they're inclined to follow up and see what else they can get out of this, Like, one of the things that I've been happy to see is that, again, I saw the community lining up for food the other day when I was dropping off my son.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, what? This is cool, I know other places have little markets and stuff going on, but Cudahy having its own, that's awesome. It's another opportunity, again, for people who are lining up. They meet each other. They talk to each other. Like, this is what you want, like a community space is that when you walk out, people are really nice. Like, buenos dias, buenas tardes.
Yes.
Like, it's something that you don't really see, like, in other places. I work in Los Feliz by Griffith Park, and you walk around and nobody's like...
I always tell people how special, like, Cudahy, but Southeast is for that. Like, it is so... My dog's name is Gordo, and my family walks him, like, 3 times a day. But people, if you go out and walk with Gordo, people will be like, oh, are you also Gordo's family? Like, right? They just know my dog, my family dog. And that's so beautiful to me. Like, people know each other by their family dogs. And, like, just by saying buenos dias, buenas tardes, it's a community that we can build. I think, obviously, there's still so much work to do to have people, like, genuinely know their neighbors and genuinely like their neighbors sometimes, and invite each other to events and to programs and things like that, because that's how we can, like, really have people know. Like, we have danzantes that train every week at Clara Park now, and it's free and people can join. We have, like, our soccer program. We had over 300 kids participate. We haven't had those programs in, like, years. But some people knew, obviously we had 300 kids there, but other families didn't know, and they're like, I wish I had known. And we always miss people, and we always try to gain them next year. But I think through, like, just community word of mouth, it's the most powerful tool for building up a community, for sure. Now,
I do want to learn a little bit about how you got started in all this. I know that we were mentioning that, you basically grew up and were born in Huntington Park, you said, right? Or Huntington Park, and then you moved to Cudahy.
Yeah, I moved to Cudahy in, like, kinder, I think. So, like, I lived off of, I don't remember the burger spot, but it was, like, off of Florence, and I think it's near Sevilla. And then we, walk over to Pacific. But we moved to Live Oak, basically across the street from Superior for 21 years.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Is that where your love for the community started? Like, how did you become active like this?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I was a really shy kid. I did the education workshops, and that really, like, drove me to become passionate about organizing. At the same time, I was doing, like, labor organizing, immigrant rights organizing. I'm a worker. I've always had at minimum 2 jobs, and even now, right? But was very passionate about just, like, community work as a whole. And like I said, I think for me was always the tenant stuff always stuck with me. I remember being 19 and, like, barely learning about city hall functions and city council functions, and asking our council members then, like, why don't you push for rent control? Like, oh, well, I don't have the votes. And it's true, they didn't. And a few years later, it's like, hey, why don't you push for rent control? Well, rent control doesn't really work. And I'm like, well, we're 85% renter. You would think that 85% of any population would get whatever they wanted. And this is supportive of them. And so that frustration was growing, I think. And then, fast forward several years later, I had run the campaigns for 3 out of the 5 council members. And I was still going to council meetings. So, like, the majority, right? And there was an appointment of someone with 0 community input. Frankly, the least legal limit for notifying community was used to appoint this person. And I was just like, this isn't fair. Process is not transparent. To me, that's incredibly important. And so I started texting my council members at the time. They were at the meeting, sitting up on the dais, and I can see them as I'm texting them. And I see them read the message, and they don't respond. And I'm like, okay. If myself, any community member should be able to lobby their council member to push for whatever they want.
Yeah.
But I literally got you there. Like, I ran your campaign, I talked to your volunteers, I ran your strategy, and you still won't even respond to my message, right? And they ended up appointing this person, and that's what angered me enough. The other council member, the only one that voted against, was like, Liz, this is why you need to run. And I decided that night to run. It was like a week before the deadline to file to run for office. So it was, like I said, I was not planning on this.
Yeah.
And I think for me, running, I ran against incumbents. I was running against council members at the time, which is typically incredibly hard. And it was knocked on every single door at least 3 times, some 4 times. We had a huge volunteer base. We were doing the thing we had to do, and we won. And when we did that, I was like, okay, awesome, rent control. Well, actually, I don't have the votes, so I need to like recruit more people, and that's where the strategy came to, like, every election cycle, recruit one more person.
Yeah.
I don't need to like throw everything out, but I do need to get one more person so I can get to at least 3 votes and pass like monumental policy changes, the ones that we need in Cudahy. And part of it, the passion was just like, I have a finite time to do this because we do have term limits in Cudahy. They were actually just extended to 12 terms, not 12 terms, 12 years. From 8 years, but still, it's still limited time. There is no guarantee that I do council for 12 years.
Yeah.
I may decide to stop in 2 years. And so it was just like that, like, frankly, part of it is anxiety. Like, I need to get it done. I have really harsh anxiety. I need to get it done. I want to get it done. And how do we do this? And so we've been able to get some good wins, but it was because, I say shout out to my landlord because he was so terrible at pushing me to do this.
Hey,
So yeah, shout out Joseph Chang.
No, I mean, well, that's what it takes. It's unfortunate because sometimes for real change to happen, you have to hit that boiling point. Like there's that point where everything just kind of, and that's it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is super important is that I think one of your first terms, if I'm wrong, correct me, but you had to deal with COVID, and then I think before that, the Delta. I think it hit
15,000 gallons of jet fuel.
What? I forgot the
Park
school.
Avenue.
Park Avenue. Yeah. I was like, what? And my mom lives just like down the street from Santa Ana Street. So direct hit and everything there. So how did you handle all that? I mean, people are already angry. They already have mistrust and stuff. Now they have like this happening over their heads,
Right.
on top of all the other environmental injustice stuff that we have to deal with. Like, how did you turn that, again, going back to the frustration, into action that people felt like you were gonna get their trust, and how are you gonna navigate all of this?
Yeah. I think important context to that was like I was 26. So I was like still frankly a baby in politics. I had just completed my first year. So still very brand new, 26 years old. January 7th, I became mayor of the city. January 14th, so 1 week later, Delta dumps 15,000 gallons of jet fuel on our city. And I remember I was at work, and all I saw, because I have Google alerts for Cudahy, and so anything Cudahy that comes up, I will get a news alert for immediately. And all I saw was like Cudahy airplane catastrophe or something like that. And I called my boss and I was like, I have to go back. I have to go home immediately. Drove home, called City Hall at the time and our city clerk, and I was like, what is happening? I saw like some wild news headline, and he's like, no, a plane didn't crash. This is what happened. This is what we know so far, I should say, because it was a few minutes. And I started seeing the news reports, and so at that point, my job became like, how do we support folks like immediately? So it's connecting them to health resources. Department of Public Health was amazing in getting folks connected. Our county supervisor was great in getting folks connected. Our LUSD board member was great as well. And so just like everyone working at the same time, I think was what we needed to do. But I remember like Delta came in, like the representative, and was like, she couldn't say I'm so sorry because then that would admit guilt. And so she was like refusing to say that word, sorry. But she was like, I feel for you. And I was, you don't. You don't. I'm the one that's having to answer for all of this. Our families are crying. Our kids don't know what's happening. And so we ended up organizing a town hall within like 3 days. We had a town hall, and that's where I think the public had the opportunity to express themselves. It was 300 plus folks that showed up.
Yeah. I was there that night. It was a packed house.
Yeah, huge. And at some point, some folks started to get a little bit like, they started yelling. Of course, like they're angry, rightfully so. Their children have experienced now like rashes and diarrhea and all these things. And so they start chanting, and the sheriff start like going to the back to try to kick them out.
Yeah.
I remember one of our community members, Mark from Easter, reaches out. He's like, Liz, they're trying to kick people out. And I remember running to the back and being like, no, you need to, this is frustration. This is what's going to happen when something like this happens. And so that was like step 1 to, I think, building community trust, having this like this town hall, but also protecting folks when needed, and telling them the information that they needed to hear. Because at that point I was being told like, Liz, your job as mayor is to tell people to everything's gonna be fine, to just calm down. And I was like, that's not my job. My job is to inform, and we don't know that. So I'm not going to say that. And folks were upset with me for saying that. But I think that that's what kept some trust in our city government to reach out to us and ask us questions. And when we did push eventually for funding from Delta, but then the pandemic happened like 2 months later.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, at that point, I was also still negotiating with Delta, but also became caseworker, therapist, like everything for community members that were losing family, that were losing their jobs, that were just like looking for basic necessities. It was a really tough time.
Yeah. I mean, and just to add to that, like again, going back to the percentage of the population in Cudahy is 85% renters. During COVID, my parents had to struggle during that time with one of the companies. I've mentioned this before, and I had to talk on my dad's behalf because he was, he only talks Spanish. So they were only trying to communicate him in English, sending the letters and all that stuff. So I had to step in, and eventually they didn't want to talk to me anymore because I was kind of getting a little pushy. They were trying to kick him out. So of course I was going to get pushy.
Of course.
And they're like, you know what? Well, you're not on the contract. We can't talk to you anymore. So then I had to kind of, communicate from afar through my dad.
Right.
But I can only imagine how rough that was for people in those situations, and we know what it was.
It was rough.
Yeah, it was rough, and they wouldn't even bat an eye. They were ready to kick people out and not care where they ended.
Yeah, and I remember during the pandemic, I tried to pass a rent freeze. Actually, I tried to pass a rent freeze, rent stabilization, and some assistance for anyone that had their rent increased beyond the percentage limitation that I was looking at, and it didn't pass.
Yeah,
and that was so rough for me because I was like, I know at that point on the council, I was the most forward facing. I was easily accessible from everyone on the council, and so I was hearing from people directly, like, Elizabeth, vamos a perder la casa. Elizabeth, nos van a desalojar. Like, we have no food. And it was incredibly, just so difficult to hear those things directly from community and recognize, like, I'm trying to find any food. I remember at some point I heard about, I think it was called World Market or something like that. It's $40 and it's like a ton of food. My little Prius filled to the brim with food. Like, I could barely close it. But I went all the way to the west side, picked up food, and then drove back, and I was like delivering boxes of elote because that's what it took, and then Delta ended up coming in and also subsidizing some of the meal deliveries, and so now we were able to double it and then send in hot meals to seniors, and so things like that happened. But it was a really, really tough time. And then I remember because of when Delta happened, like, if I heard the word Delta, like, I would start crying immediately. It was definitely like a trigger word. And then toward the end of COVID, or the end of the first year of COVID, I should say, the second big strain was Delta. And it was like exposure therapy. Oh, no, it was so hard. It was like compounding stress and frustration and anxieties and all these things that, we were all feeling. Like, everyone was feeling, for sure. It just felt like a really lonely place because who do you talk to? Like,
of course.
Oh, I'm an elected official and I'm really sad.
Yeah, right. They're like, wait, what? Is she supposed to feel? Yeah.
I'm a chillona, so I'm tearing up. But, that's how it is. It's unfortunately a really tough space to be in because you also recognize, like, you're there to support people. And during COVID, at some points, it felt like where do I go?
Yeah. Yeah. And you see, this is why I think these conversations are important. So, it humanizes the people that we see as these, individuals in power. Because a lot of the times, if you don't know what's going on, you just see these heads, right? And you're like, well, they're not doing anything.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how you have to handle all these pressures, right? From all this variety of different things. And at the same time, meet the expectations of what these people voted you for,
Oh, 100%.
I'm sure people tell you like, well, why are you guys working on this when we need that? Like, how do you how do you work through that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, especially when people reach out, I think that's the easiest way to explain, because I'm able to now one-on-one explain to you, like, this is my thought process, versus, when folks aren't communicating with us, and so we don't know what their concerns are.
Yeah.
I always try to tell people, you need to message me. Oh, my street light has been out for 6 months. Señora, ¿por qué no me dijo? Me conoce, sabe mi número de celular. You know my phone number. Why don't you text me, call me, whatever it may be. Send me a picture of the light and I will personally go and find it, right? But I try to remind people, like, I don't live on your side of the city. I don't live in front of, like, your block. And then when I pass by, I may not pass by at the same time. So I may not see the light that's out. I may not see that cars are speeding at 4 p.m. because they were upset at the traffic by the school. And so trying to talk to people through that, I think, is really important. And also, like, showing them how much work there is, and also explaining to them, like, these are the barriers. I'm trying really hard, but city government is slow. If people think it's slow for them, imagine for those of us that are working on the thing. And we're, like, just trying to get it done. But, like, for example, we have an affordable housing project that I've been, like, super excited for 6 years. For 6 years. And we're getting all the funding for it. It's looking good. But at the same time, like, it's 6 years. That is a really long time. And so I totally understand when people get frustrated, because they're like, well, you've been telling us about that for so many years.
Yeah, right.
It's also pandemic years. It's also all these other things. But trying to walk them through everything is, I think, the most key. Even our park space, like, we have so much funding to fix it. We're starting Clara Park and Cudahy Park later at the beginning of next year. But that's taken us several years because, again, COVID and pandemic and stuff, but also just, like, city processes are slow, and explaining that to people, I think, is key.
Yeah, that helps, me being in the perspective of somebody who is, again, naive into all this process. Like, there'll be times where I'm driving around the city and I'll see, like, vacant buildings or just buildings that have just been kind of, like, left alone there. And I'm thinking, like, what's going on? Like, there's just so much space that, they can be used for this or that. But again, I'm just talking from a position where I have no idea what it takes to rebuild this if needed, So I can only understand the frustration when people see that and they don't see that change happen. But again, as a long-term resident there, I've been able to see things move around where, like I mentioned, I feel safer walking around. Like, I see more people being active in the city, walking around with their dogs, with their kids. Like, that wasn't a thing before. Like, so that regardless, there's that progress is happening, and it's just not apparent if you're looking at it from that minuscule, perspective. You got to, like, step away and be like, we're going in the right way, you can say. We're trying. Now, like, how have you balanced this for yourself personally? Like, how has that the whole Delta stuff, the COVID, how did that kind of continue your fight?
I think also recognizing at the time in 2020, when Delta happened and when COVID happened, I was the only progressive on the city council. And so even in terms of Delta, like, other people felt like they'll support us in the long run. I'm like, no, we got to push them. They're a big corporation. I'm sure they'll do something, but we got to push them. Otherwise, we're not going to get anything. And not everyone agreed with me on that. Yeah. Even when it came to, like, we were the only city that successfully revisited the sheriff's contract and what that meant. And it's because of that we were able to maintain a budget in the green, that we were able to now bring in community programming. Yeah. And it's because we were able to push forward, because I was, like, that strong voice as mayor at the time. And thinking back, I'm like, what if I had not been in that space? What if there was someone else and they didn't recruit Daisy, and they didn't recruit Cynthia, and now Amanda, to where we're going to have a city that's going to be led by progressive women that have passed rent stabilization, that we're the first city to pass a ceasefire in all of Southern California. And that was rough. And so recognizing, like, I'm so blessed and honored that I get to do this work, that I'm willing to do it again, you know, and I did it again. I ran a second time. I think that's what keeps me in the work. But also just family, going to soccer games, chilling, hanging out with my cat. I think that, and my friends have been amazing in letting me vent and talk about the things that are really hard. I think it's incredibly difficult to be an elected official that cares. There's a lot of elected officials. I'm not going to say that all of them don't care, but they care for different things. And I think that from my perspective especially, there aren't that many of us. There's a growing amount, and I love that. And I think that there were some big wins in November around local level people that care. But I think that's what keeps me going too, is like, there's hope.
Yeah.
There's hope.
Yeah, no, I mean, at the same time, you're building confidence in the people, again, to, you know, look forward to something, because that's what you want. You don't want to just live in your city and be like, oh, this is it. Like, this is where it ends. But the moment you start making people confident, then they start spreading the message without you needing to do it, you know? And that's how you make that change. And I think that's how you build those support systems. It's easy for you to feel alone in different things, you know? But I think when you start voicing it, you start realizing that, hey, you know, this person feels the exact same way I do. Like, let's get together, you know, and see where that goes. And I've seen that throughout HP right now, Bell. Like, there's all these collectives that are coming up that are bringing new life into the community, you know? Like, there's a run club, you know, we have a run club in HP
run club,
so like come on, that's cool. And I see the excitement people have, you know. We have the cultural center, hopefully, you know, happens again in the next couple of years, but it's another way to bring the community together, to say, hey, we're here and this is what we want, and we're gonna get it, you know. Because I think as a people, we're like that, you know. As an individual, I feel like I'm that way, you know. Like, I may not have all the resources, but I work with what I got, and I make sure that I continue pushing myself with that. And, you know, if we bring that into a bigger scale, like, Cudahy, you know, grows, we all grow, and the surrounding areas as well.
I think that's the hope. Especially, I mean, the other thing that I want to mention is it's not just been city council on these initiatives, right? Like, when it came to rent stabilization, Easter Communities for Environmental Justice, Communities for a Better Environment, the Mujeres over at California Latinas for Reproductive Justice in Bell Gardens, they were so helpful. Our community residents were so helpful. I remember, like, in terms of the percentage, there's a huge fight over, like, what's the cap for rent control in Cudahy. And I asked our community, like, what number do you all want? Because I'll push for it. I'm not saying I'm going to win it, but I'm going to fight hard for it. And they said 3%, and we got 3%. You know, and when it came to ceasefire, I had already been thinking about it. But I was also like, what does this look like at the local level, right? And a lot of people were saying, like, oh, yeah, okay, Cudahy is calling for a ceasefire. Yeah, who cares, right? But the reality is, like, it is now the official voice of the city of Cudahy telling our congressional representatives, including, you know, Representative Robert Garcia, who has been supportive now, our senators, and telling them and saying, this is how we as a community want to see you vote. That's the purpose of it. And that came from a community member as well, like Daisy Loya, who's a part of the HP Run Club. And she's a community member in Cudahy that has been, like, wanting to get more engaged around environmental justice issues. And so when I share these wins, like, it is not just the city council that voted on it and we're the ones that won. Like, it is a community effort. And that's why I love that we get to do this work, because, again, I don't know how many people would do the work the way that we've been able to do it in Cudahy.
Yeah, and I mean, to some people, it might seem like a little crazy. Like, what, you're shooting for this? It's like, yeah, so what? We are, you know, we're gonna make it happen, even if it's not to the standards that people are completely asking for. We're still gonna make a move so we can try to get closer to that goal, you know. And I think that's just anything's gonna move forward. And you know, going back to the fact that there's all these platforms and, like, collectives kind of starting up. I've been to, I'm sure you stopped by Art Space and HPA, you know, so it being so close to my house, I'm like 3 minutes away, you know, and, like, just being able to go into this area where there's collective ideas happening, and, like, these big movements that you were like, what, like, these people are around me, like, you feel less alone, you feel empowered. And then I think one of the things that I went to was they had, like, an altar for Palestine.
Yes, yeah.
But when I got there, I was like this is it. Like,
it's impact.
Exactly. It's the impact. We all feel the same way about this.
Right.
Like, and then when I heard Cudahy was passing the ceasefire, I was like, what? Of course it'll be Cudahy. That's awesome. Yeah. And, you know, and it, just stuff like that, it makes you feel like, yes, like, it's a good feeling. You know?
Yeah. There's a lot. I was sharing with you before we went on air where 10 years ago it was Cela Colectivo meeting at Sunday's Best in Maywood because the owner is from Southeast LA and she opened up the space. And then it was Proyecto Vecindad, also like organizing art space and Alivio and Bell, Crucitas in Huntington Park. Crucitas used to host an open mic as well. And you know, they have more limited space now, but they did amazing work around like collective organizing. And now it's Art Space and HP Run Club and all those folks at like FTP Cafe. And like, it's super cool to see how much that organizing has grown and how much of it like stays alive and comes reinvigorated with other folks, younger folks as well. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, you know, it's one of those things that I definitely wish we had more of when I was a kid, because I feel like things would have turned out definitely different. I mean, you can say that about anything, but you know, things happened the way it did, and you know, we're still in positions where we still want to have a positive effect on our community, you know, and now it's up to us to kind of turn around and show the youth like, hey, this is possible, you know. And that in itself, you mentioned earlier about having the workshops for college and stuff. I graduated in class of 08. So when I was applying for college, I had really nobody, you know, like I'm first gen 2, first of 4. So I was like, college, like I got to apply, and I messed up on my applications. I think I forgot to include some class that was required, and all applications that I submitted to Cal States, they all got rejected simply because I missed a part in the application. And I was like, I felt sad, you know. Obviously, I was like, damn, I got rejected. And then I later found out that it was because I wasn't completely aware of what I needed to turn in. And, you know, after that, I went to community college and all that. But it would have been nice to have those type of programs, you know, at any point, just to kind of help people who were lost in that whole.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that to that specific story and to like how I shared how I started getting involved in similar ways, like, there's the organizing that happens on the ground with like regular people, but I think that also speaks to the issues, like systemic issues, right? Like, why didn't we have ample access to a college counselor? Yeah. My college counselor she was a sweetheart. She was great, but she was college counselor and tech counselor and like all these other job titles. And so she wasn't able to support students, even like myself, top of the class, great student. But even I wasn't able to access her support as much as I think I would have needed. Yeah. And you should have had that too at your school, right? And so like, I think that connection of like, how do we change the systemic through the on the ground organizing is so important. And it's why I'm here. It's why I've like done the work and tried to do the work. And it's why I'm hoping to continue it once I like retire from local politics, and just organize and do the work on the ground.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. This is the kind of stuff that breaks down those narratives that we've heard so much about, like when you grow up, like I want to leave Cudahy, I want to leave Southeast LA. Fair, it's fair to do that, you know, but at the end of the day, if you are going to stick around, like, are you going to stick around with the same community that you've grew up in, or are you going to do something different, you know, like what do you want to see now? And even if that's not the case, coming back from wherever you went is always going to be an impactful thing, as long as you take action or at least get involved with people who are involved in this, you know, in this whole system.
Yeah.
Cudahy is going to be in good hands, you know. Southeast LA is going to be in good hands as we move forward. And I have super high hopes for that. Something that I never felt before up until now, you know. So, yeah, I got to say thank you to you too, you know.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for having these spaces and hosting it. I think, as we mentioned before, right, like having these art spaces, having these opportunities, I think, for people to see the arts as more than just like, I like coloring, which I think is what a lot of our parents think of, but recognizing like arts are an art form, and they can be a career, and they can be just a hobby, they can be whatever you want it to be. And I think that a lot of the organizing that has happened is stemming from the arts, in Southeast LA at least. And like having that like emotional expression, like just
Exactly.
freedom to express, I guess, is the way to put it.
Of course, that keyword right there, expression. That's what we're doing, and we're allowing that expression to impact the people around us who find these experiences relatable. And then before you know it, we got these spaces happening. So I really do hope like we have stuff coming up. I know there was I think it's Chris from the Sela Bicycle Center.
Yeah.
He was talking to me about like he potentially trying to do like a ciclavia somewhere in Southeast LA.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, that is awesome. Like, this is what we need, like people who are interested in these ideas, who want to play around with this and see how far it can go. That's the thing. That's what we need. Like,
dream big.
Dream big. You dream big, and then that's. I don't know. It gets you happy. It gets you excited going back to that.
I'm just saying, who would have thought like Cudahy would be the first city in Southeast LA to get a Sprouts? We dreamed big, Downey's jealous. They're getting their second now.
Oh yeah, I did see the signs. I drove past. I was like, wait, this is Sprouts here too.
Yeah. Ours is better. I'm just kidding. But like, who would have thought? Like, I would have never thought as a little girl, reading my parents' rent increases, that I would lead like rent stabilization, rent control in my city. And like, that makes me so damn proud. That we get to dream big, that we get to make big things happen. And I know that the organizing that's happening in Southeast LA is gonna amount to like even more things that I'm really excited to see.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you mentioned like, we have options now for healthier options. There's a local gym, that's to me, that was one of the biggest ones. I was like, oh, I don't have to drive down
with the
pool. Oh my God, I love that pool in summer. I'll be doing some laps in there, but it beats having to go out of your town, like keep it local, help, meet the people around there. And, that's how we're going to grow, like for a long time, we had to drive up to far places. Like I use as an example all the time with Alivio. Like if I wanted to go to an open mic or a place where there was like readings, I have to go to Hollywood, Highland Park.
Right.
Like, nonetheless, there's these spaces that are popping out. Now we have the opportunity to just keep the money within our neighborhoods, And I think that's
the money,
badass.
the vibes, keep it in the neighborhood for sure. Yeah.
Now, if you had the chance to kind of look back at yourself, like young Elizabeth, like what do you think you'd do differently in terms of like how you want to move in this world?
I think the real answer is owning more of like, I'm kicking butt, and I was gonna use another word, but I'm kicking butt, and like being able to celebrate those things, right? And I've done a really good job of organizing. And as an organizer, your job is never to put yourself at the forefront. Like, you're taught, you put others at the forefront. They are the leaders. And so it's always been really hard for me to be like, yeah, I did that. But I think like that's something that I would definitely tell my little self. And I've learned in the last I think couple of years that I need to do more of that and celebrate our wins. I think as organizers, we don't do enough celebrating of our wins. And I think Southeast LA needs to do that. I tried to do that in July. In July, it was 1 year since we passed rent control in Cudahy, and I know I keep talking about it, but it's my baby. And so I held a first birthday party for rent control with a birthday cake and everything. And I put my childhood home on the front of the birthday cake, because I was like, that is what brought me to this space, in community with other renters in the city that were like, this is what's going to help us. We need money literally back in our pockets. And so, I think that's what I would tell myself. Celebrate your wins, but also celebrate others' wins all the more often.
Yeah. No, that's a beautiful way to end it. At the end of the day, it's sometimes we're a little too hard on ourselves, and it's like, no, you're doing stuff. You're doing great things. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for what you've been doing. I'm definitely looking forward to the new stuff that's going to be going on. But I learned something important today, again, I've kind of been a critic over the last couple of years, and I mentioned it for different episodes, pero uno no sabe sometimes, and until you get the opportunity to kind of talk to somebody, or at least kind of see how things work, you become more compassionate towards it. And then you start, again, navigating your emotions a little better. You start realizing that I got to be more active about what I do if I really want those changes to come through, But thank you so much.
Yeah.
For people, if they want to follow you on Instagram or see what you're up to, like, where can people find you?
Everything is Liz from Sela.
Liz from Sela. Easy.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. We're going to be signing off. You're listening to KQBH LP, Los Angeles, California, 101.5 FM. And we will see you guys next week.